it is important, if you have elevated bilirubin, you go and get a liver ultrasound to check for fatty liver, especially if you have a history of obesity, especially if you have a history of alcohol abuse, which would be alcoholic fatty liver disease. The more liver toxic compounds will cause more acute liver inflammation in the short term than something like bioidentical testosterone if guys are going to push the dose, but too much testosterone will still wreck liver, absolutely.
So what's the approach here? They people might suspect they have it, or they said, let me just go check things out just to rule it out. I have been feeling whatever. Let me just go see if that's what it is. What would be the typical labs that would, I mentioned AST and ALT, potentially you can elaborate on what they are if you'd like, but what would be the typical labs that someone would need to do to assess this properly?
Yeah, so the best thing that people can do is just to go get tested. I have this this saying that I took from, I believe I took it from Chris Kresser, which is test, not guess. And if people go out and take the time to test and be strategic about these things, they can save themselves a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of anxiety around their health. So go and get a test. It's very, very easy. Now, I would just call this a liver panel. So a liver panel will contain AST, ALT, it will contain your bilirubin, it will contain a full list of all the tests that are relevant to your liver. Now, there are other tests in a comprehensive panel that will be useful in conjunction, such as C-reactive protein, HbA1c, triglycerides, all useful. But when primarily looking at the liver, I'm looking at, now, in the States, I will add, there's a test called Gamma GT. That's included by default in Australia and the UK and I believe Canada for liver. It's not included by default in the States. So if you're in the States and you're getting a liver panel done, I would recommend adding Gamma GT to that test. Now, when we're looking at a liver panel, firstly, it is relatively common for guys to have a slightly above range AST and ALT. And that can be a measure of simply how hard is the liver working at that point in time. So if you took, paracetamol or ibuprofen, or, even had a whiskey with dinner the night before, or you did some squats the night before in the gym and then you got a blood test, that above range ALT and AST, that's not saying, hey, you've got liver disease, your liver is malfunctioning, or it's burdened, or it's sick, or it's not regenerating, or whatever. It's simply saying that, hey, your liver at this point of time is working slightly harder than what an average person's liver would be for good reason. So that's nothing to worry about. Most people who train, who don't specifically take a day off the day before, or take some form of pharmaceutical medication, will have slightly elevated AST and ALT. That is not signifying a problem. Now, if the AST and the ALT are jacked up in terms of, I often say if there's 3 numbers, get a test. If it's, the reference range usually goes up to about 40 or 50. But if the AST and ALT are increased significantly, and that is a subjective word because it comes down to your practitioner, but if they're increased significantly, then I do believe it does warrant at least a physical liver exam where the physician will physically, touch the liver in terms of poking it and seeing if it's sensitive. I often just refer guys to go straight for an ultrasound and bypass that unless the physician is particularly competent. But the main thing that you want to be looking at, in my opinion, is also a combination of the elevations in bilirubin and the elevations in gamma GT. So bilirubin is the key that we're looking for fatty liver. And this is where it can get a little bit, not confusing per se, but it can get a little bit more complicated for people trying to self-diagnose. And the ultimate bottom line here is work with someone who knows how to fix this for you so that you don't have to worry about it. But for guys wanting to understand this themselves, if you've got an elevated bilirubin, and I would even argue if your bilirubin is approaching the top of the range and you have symptoms, the range for bilirubin is usually about a 20, then you want to get a liver ultrasound to check if there's fat in the liver. However, there is a condition called Gilbert syndrome, which I assume was named after a guy called Gilbert. And Gilbert syndrome, shout out to Gil on the TRT and Hormone Optimization channel. The thing with Gilbert syndrome is that it will look like you have fatty liver disease on your blood test. You will have an elevated bilirubin. However, when you get an ultrasound done, it will actually show that you don't have any fat in your liver. And this is where this gets confusing because we can't go, okay, elevated bilirubin, fatty liver disease. It's no, if you've got an elevated bilirubin, that is warrants you going and getting an ultrasound to check for it, but it may also be a benign condition called Gilbert syndrome or Gilbert's disease. And if you do have Gilbert syndrome for your whole life, you will have elevated bilirubin, so that it looks like you have this liver condition when you don't. So it is important, if you have elevated bilirubin, you go and get a liver ultrasound to check for fatty liver, especially if you have a history of obesity, especially if you have a history of alcohol abuse, which would be alcoholic fatty liver disease. And the other one is gamma GT. And gamma GT is more of a measurement, from what I've seen, that pops up when we're looking at something where the liver is actually damaged or the liver is actually sustaining damage. And if a gamma GT is elevated, typically I'll see this when alcohol is still being used, liver toxic anabolic steroids are still being used, other liver toxic drugs are being used. And if that's elevated, now we have a situation which is more urgent, it's more time sensitive, and it's often more severe.
Okay. You mentioned anabolic steroids. Have you seen this occur with men just simply taking testosterone, regardless of dose?
Regardless of dose is a big call.
Yeah, well, if we're going to talk about you taking 10 grams a week, I mean...
I have never seen liver disease induced by testosterone only. However, I haven't seen guys running grams and grams a week of test and check their livers at the time. But the more liver toxic compounds will cause more acute liver inflammation in the short term than something like bioidentical testosterone if guys are going to push the dose. But too much testosterone will still wreck liver, absolutely.
When we're saying too much, is it serum level base? Or?
Well, this is a good question, right? Because I would argue that it depends on the guy. And this is where I think it gets a bit more nuanced. If I take a guy who's 8% body fat and I take a guy who's 30% body fat and give them both 700 milligrams a week of test, I would hypothesize that the leaner guy is probably going to tolerate that better and get better outcomes from that in terms of the desired outcome of the testosterone use, but also less side effects because his body is more primed to use it. Now, I don't think that being sub 10% gives you a free pass to take whatever steroids you want, but I think that if you go beyond the physiological amount of testosterone that your body can tolerate, which is a subjective question, I know that, and people like myself and Danny will argue that that's a little bit... probably a little bit higher than what the reference ranges would dictate.
Just a slight,
slightly higher. Yeah. I think the reference ranges might be a little bit off. But if we're going well beyond that, we're now creating a scenario where the body is out of rhythm with itself in terms of you're putting in more hormone than your body could ever naturally produce. And one thing that is going to start to take the burden of that is going to be the liver. Now, what is that going to lead to long term? Can you just use liver support as like a prophylaxis in terms of, hey, I'm running a big cycle, I can just take this and my liver will be fine? Well, I mean, if you go to war wearing a bulletproof vest, you may still die, but you have better chances, sure.
Right.
So, and that's the way that I think that we should be viewing this, is that if someone wants to take a high dose of an anabolic steroid for a cycle for whatever reason, then you absolutely should be supporting your liver, but I don't think it should be framed that it gives people a free pass in terms of, hey, I've got my liver bulletproof, now I can do whatever I want. I don't think that's the approach. If you've just started TRT, it is completely normal to feel overwhelmed and confused. There's a lot of new territory to cover, and there is a lot of conflicting information. I wrote TRT 101 so that you can have everything that you need to know in an instruction manual in one place that you can refer back to, that you can have all the questions answered before they even come up. TRT 101 is my best practice approach for TRT from start to finish, and it contains everything that you need to avoid all the challenges and pitfalls that I've seen come up in my clients over the last 5 years. You can check it out via the link below.
So now we've identified some of the causes. Do you have different protocols depending on what it is? So meaning if it's strictly fatty liver, I would do such and such. If it's not fatty liver, then I tend to do such and such. If somebody's taking, as you were mentioning, maybe a steroid cycle, I would do such and such. Someone just wants to maintain healthy liver. He's run labs, everything is fine. But he's like, you know what? I just want to take something on the side just to make sure I keep liver function optimal. Can I assume you've got different protocols or different ideas of what should be used in these cases? Yeah,
absolutely. And the first thing I lead off with is that, people on the internet who screech and shout things will throw around that, you don't need to do a liver detox or a liver cleanse because the liver regenerates itself and yada, yada, yada. Well, then we don't need TRT because the testicles make testosterone. You don't need thyroid replacement because the thyroid makes thyroid hormone.
Right.
If that was true, then there wouldn't be liver cancer or cirrhosis or hepatitis. So arguments like that are, I would say that a 10 or 14 day juice cleanse isn't going to help your liver, but the idea that the liver is regenerative is true. The liver does regenerate and it does heal, but I say that the liver is like Wolverine, and for anyone who has seen Logan, if you haven't seen Logan, I won't spoil the movie, but Logan is the last of the Wolverine movies where Wolverine loses his ability to regenerate, and then the plot is built around what happens when someone who can or has spent their whole life or career, we'll say as a superhero, with the capacity to regenerate, and then they lose that ability. And that's kind of like the liver. A healthy, good functioning liver will be able to regenerate, and it will be able to heal itself and take the insult of, a small stressor here and there. But once the liver crosses into a state of disease, like Old Man Logan does in Logan, then all of a sudden, when someone who is reliant on regenerating loses that ability, it becomes quite catastrophic. So when we're looking at what to use for the liver, you're completely right. There's lots of different tools in the liver toolbox. I don't use that many of them because I think a lot of them aren't as effective as the others. I do think you need an array of tools when you are dealing with the liver, though, because certain things only work for certain things and don't work for others. There are some jack of all trades, master of none, like let's say like Tudka, for example, which is basically good for everything for the liver. But not all supplements are effective for everything. So for example, milk thistle has been shown in research to be effective immediately post-liver insult in upregulating glutathione production, but milk thistle isn't going to do anything for your fatty liver. And we see this in studies. We look at these studies which we go, okay, well, curcumin or milk thistle or this other herb, these reduced liver enzymes in fatty liver disease, but it didn't get rid of any of the fat. So yes, it may act as a band-aid in terms of it may help with the stress on the body of having a fatty liver, but when it comes to something like this, you don't want to be taking liver supplements for your whole life. You don't want to go, oh, I've got fatty liver, I've got this liver thing, so now I have to take liver support for my whole life. You want to fix it, get Wolverine back to the point that he can regenerate on his own, and then you don't have to worry about it anymore. So yes, different tools, different horses, different courses. So firstly, if we look at prophylaxis, which I think a lot of people would be looking at. So I look at prophylaxis in two contexts. One is that you're taking a responsible anabolic steroid cycle when you're looking to mitigate some of the potential stress on your organ systems. And the other one is you're looking at some kind of prophylaxis, which means preventative treatment for environmental estrogens. You're looking for something to help the liver support a modern lifestyle, which may be a little bit more stressful or more cumbersome on the liver than evolutionarily potentially it should have been. Mm-hmm. That's most people. And this is where I like a product called NAC, N-acetylcysteine, which gets talked about all the time in this space. Most people are familiar with it. I like NAC because it's cheap and it's super available. And if you're looking at something that's a prophylaxis, I think going for something that is cost effective for most people is a good idea, because otherwise you're throwing a whole bunch of money at something that may not even be a problem. And I think that money might be better spent on other supplements potentially. Yeah. So I like NAC and phosphatidylcholine together. Firstly, they're both essentially nutrients to the body, i.e. that they're part of our, what Paul Saladino would call the human operating system. Phosphatidylcholine being a fat-soluble version of choline, phospholipid form, and NAC being the precursor to glutathione. Now, the reason I only, and this is just my personal opinion, the reason why I only use NAC in the context of prophylaxis is that NAC is the precursor to glutathione, which is your liver's main antioxidant. So if someone's got liver disease, which would impair their body's ability to make glutathione in the first place, putting a precursor into putting raw materials into a faulty factory isn't going to get you what you want at the end. It may get you some of what you want, but it's probably not the most effective solution as just going in with what that factory would make if it was functioning well to support it, which would be something like actual glutathione. So NAC, phosphatidylcholine, so choline, for those who aren't aware, is, I would argue that it's a vitamin. It's not included in the essential vitamins, but it's a B vitamin. And what is interesting when you look at genetics is that when we go back to, well, why do some people develop non-alcoholic fatty liver disease before they get fat? Why is that the thing that breaks their metabolism? I'm not saying this is the only thing that happens, but in my research and in my opinion, this is due to potentially a dietary deficiency of choline. And what's been found in genetic studies is that some people's genetics do have a higher baseline requirement for choline than other people. Now, choline is found especially rich in egg yolks and liver, but it's also found to be very rich in red meat. So my hypothesis, and this is all it is a hypothesis, people are welcome to disagree, is that if people are developing with a lack of choline in the diet and they have a genetic high requirement for choline, I think this is what leads to NAFLD. So phosphatidylcholine, a 500 milligram soft gel, a good size egg yolk is about 150 milligrams. So you're getting a good amount in with one soft gel of phosphatidylcholine per day. 500 milligrams, plenty for prophylaxis. And NAC, 600 milligrams, 1200 milligrams, 1 to 2 times per day. I like it in the morning. You can definitely take it at night. I find that it disrupts my sleep, but some people find they may not get sleep disruption from it. That is a good, cheap, effective prophylaxis that you could take long term. You would be very unlikely to get side effects from, and it wouldn't put a hole in your wallet.
Taking phosphatidylcholine versus taking straight up choline. Like
Good
when you
question.
get the supplements there, it's often an inositol choline mix. Is the phosphatidylcholine just a better version of it, a more biologically available version of it, or
more bioavailable? Yeah. So when we're looking at regular choline supplementation, we're looking at choline bitartrate. Choline bitartrate is not a bad product, and the reason why I like the choline bitartrate is that's what comes mixed with the inositol, which is the 1-2 punch for the fatty liver. But if I'm just using choline on its own, if I've got phosphatidylcholine compared with choline bitartrate has about if we're looking at phosphatidylcholine, which is like 100% bioavailable or close to, choline bitartrate, you're looking at about a 50% bioavailability. So
Gotcha.
500 milligrams of choline bitartrate is about the equivalent of a gram of phosphatidylcholine.
And is there an inositol equivalent, more bioavailable version of it?
I'm sure someone has made one. I think myo-inositol is one that comes to mind. But in my experience, and this is why it's been so good to work with so many guys on this, advising them from an educational standpoint, of course, is that the choline bitartrate and the inositol that comes in those Now Foods 250 capsules, the cheap ones you get off iHerb or Amazon, they do the job just fine. So it's
Gotcha.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. If someone came out with like a phosphatidylcholine and enhanced bioavailability inositol, would it be, you'd probably have to take less, but at the end of the day, it would probably be equally effective. There are protocols based on injectable choline and inositol for fatty liver, but I haven't been able to access enough of that to know what the equivalent would be for an oral conversion.
Gotcha.
One of the biggest secrets that I come to in the later lectures, which I'll share now, is that the way to avoid side effects on TRT and the way to achieve what you're hoping to achieve is that you have to live in the way that you would be producing the amount of testosterone that you're injecting if your system was working properly. Personally, I would take a suboptimal protocol with optimal daily habits compared to a optimal TRT protocol and terrible daily habits.